Welcome to Diaspora's Career Challenges, where we dive into the questions every diaspora and immigrant loves to hear. Where are you really from? And the classic, what's that accent? Because clearly your name and accent are far more important than your qualifications, right? I am Sweta Regmi, award-winning career strategist and CEO of Teach and Do, with an accent that somehow always manages to steal the spotlight. On this podcast, we will explore the impossible quest of fitting in. From not from here, not from there, to sure, I'll blend in. We'll tackle the joys of code switching, the myth of cultural fit, and why people can never, ever pronounce your name, but somehow they can nail Mikhail Gorbachev every time. If you're done explaining where you're from or why your background makes you too much and not enough for others, well, buckle up. You're in the right place. Let's get into it. Today, I have an honor to welcome Nina Melendez Ibarra. She is half Sri Lankan, half Puerto Rican, and now American. She is an Emmy-nominated producer. She's also a journalist, now an author. Currently working at LinkedIn team as a senior content producer. She's worked in the media for almost 15 years, including CNN, Bloomberg, and BET. She's lived and worked all over the world, including Japan, France, Ghana, and Puerto Rico, and now resides in Brooklyn. She is a huge advocate of supporting underprivileged women and voices in media. Well, Nina, welcome back. I know that we went to API community event last year, and as a South Asian person, I chose you as my speaker. And you know what? You've lived in Japan, Puerto Rico, Sri Lanka, Ghana. I mean, how many languages do you know? Spanish, Japanese, a little bit, I heard.
I speak two completely fluently, French and English, and then my Spanish is, I am working on my Spanish.
And this is the show all about people having that immigrant background, and you do have that. You're half Sri Lankan and Puerto Rican, right? And do you really get that now? Where you really from? For that, how do you handle that?
Yeah, so I always just say all over the place. You know, sometimes I ask for clarity. I'm saying, are you wondering like where my parents are from? Because I'm sort of ethnically ambiguous on my face, and my name is very Latino, you know, and so I'll say, well, my mom is from Puerto Rico and my father is from Sri Lanka, but I live in XYZ, or I grew up in, you know, Massachusetts or something like that. So it is a tough question. It was tougher when I was younger. That was a hard one to answer all the time, you know, especially when, you know, because I was in high school or elementary school or whatever, and I'm like, yeah, I'm from here. I'm from Massachusetts, and people would be like, no, but where are you really from? And I was like, well, where I was born in Sri Lanka, but I don't, you know, I didn't identify as a Sri Lankan as much when I was little because I grew up with my mom who's Puerto Rican. So those questions always feel layered, and then I feel like I have to overshare and I have to explain my existence and why I feel like I'm from here and not there, and it gets complicated.
Yeah, what was it like growing up as a child of immigrant back then, and has it changed now that you're getting older?
So, you know, my mom is Puerto Rican, like I said, and I, you know, Puerto Ricans are technically Americans, but English is my mom's third language. I don't know if she would even identify herself as an immigrant. I didn't really see her as an immigrant. I think it was just more so growing up kind of in a country where perhaps I didn't quite fit in the way that other people did, perhaps. It was challenging, right? So we left Sri Lanka when I was maybe 3-4 years old. So I was very little. I didn't speak English, and I think the hardest part was just sort of figuring out what my identity was as I grew up. My mother is, I look a lot like my mother, but I have the complexion of my father. My mother has like olive skin, green eyes, blonde hair. So there's certainly growing up a lot of questions about like, are you adopted, right? And there's of course nothing wrong with being adopted, but when you're a child and people ask you that, you immediately begin to feel like, oh, I'm not really part of my family. I'm not part of, my mother. I don't look like her. We're not. So that was a little tough. And then asking, like I said earlier, like questions of where am I from, and that sort of persisted because then when I was 10 years old, we moved to France. And when I moved to France, that's when I really felt like an immigrant because, again, I didn't speak the language and we were, my grandparents lived there, but that was very much like a jarring, like away from the States that, more or less felt like home to this country that I did not feel like home at all. And there also I was mistaken. A lot of people thought I was Middle Eastern, Moroccan or Tunisian, Algerian. And that was also, again, me having to like explain who I was, where I was from. I had an accent when I spoke French, but they didn't see me as American because I guess I was blonde and blue-eyed. So there was just, I would say, just this constant feeling of like me having to justify who I was and why I was where I was in all parts of my life, and certainly like in my professional life as well. I think it's just like numb to it now, but yeah. And then you mentioned I lived in Japan, and that was another, there again, very much an immigrant. Lived there for 3 years, and no one thought I was American because I guess I don't fit that paradigm of what an American looks like. The Japanese, certainly where I was, didn't really know where Puerto Rico was, and then Sri Lanka, they maybe some of them knew, but it was just always like, I'm like this obscure person and where am I from and who am I type of thing, and not in a cool, mysterious way, but in the like confusing.
I get it. I personally sometimes feel like it. I've lived in Canada for more than, let's say, it's more than 24 years. I've lived in the States for a bit as an immigrant. My husband got laid off and we had to immigrate to Canada. If you feel this, when I go back home, which is Nepal, that's where I was born, I feel like, I don't belong there anymore because I've lived here, and the people there, no matter how much I try, I look like a local, I talk like a local, right? Mm-hmm. But they kind of spotted that, are you an outsider? They kind of spotted. So it feels like sometimes I personally feel I don't belong here because I don't look like that Canadian thing, the way that you should be looking. We're getting better. But when I go there, they sense the accent has changed, dialects has changed, and they feel like, where are you from, right? So I feel that identity crisis too. So do you feel that too when you've traveled around back home, the country you're from, like your parents are from? Do you feel the same thing?
So I was born in Sri Lanka, right? Like I said, I was there till I was 3 years old, and I've never gone back. So for me, Sri Lanka has never been home for me. When I go to Puerto Rico, and I was literally just there like yesterday. When I go to Puerto Rico, I've been going there since I was little, and that feels like home, but my Spanish isn't fluent, right? So there's a little bit of like, it feels like home. I identify very much with being Puerto Rican, but I don't speak the language as fluently, even though, my whole family does around me. So there is always, I can completely relate to just feeling like where, maybe the place that I feel is home doesn't always treat me like I am home there. Right. And I feel that way also with France. When I spent my formative years in France. It's tough. It's an interesting question, but it's, yeah. It's tough. I would say New York City, because it is so diverse and there is such, a rainbow of people here, I'm more easily assimilated, and I get a little bit less of the, is this, where you belong or whatnot. But I will say that like American culture, even though this is where I've spent the majority of my life, American culture still very much feels like it's a little foreign to me. There are things about it that I'm just like, why do Americans do that? You know, and I'm married to an American. I mean, he's from Michigan. He spent, you know, he's like very American, if you know, and sometimes I'll say things like, you know, Americans, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, aren't you American? Like, don't you have a US passport? Didn't you go to college? And I was like, yeah, but, you know, so sometimes I feel like it's a very cultural, like there's a cultural clash.
That's interesting. Do you have any examples so I can literally think about it too? What's example that you feel like it's too American for you?
Oh God, there's so many, but they're small. They're dumb but small, but they're just so like, for example, you know, the way kids talk to their parents, and certainly growing up, the way like I had friends talk to their parents was something in Puerto Rican culture. Like you just do not talk to your mother or your father that way, you know? So that always made me go, that's weird. Another thing was this, like shoes on the, I don't know why I think of this, it's so stupid, but shoes on the couch, like wow. Kids wearing shoes on their couch or something like, and I remember going to my friend's house and be like, I mean, my God, if I wore my outdoor shoes on the couch, I would get, you know, smacked. Type of bread in the house, or all of these like very sugary cereals, you know, or sometimes even like when I would like watching sitcoms, the families that I saw and the way that they behaved on TV was just did not all reflect like the way we were. Christmas time, all of so many presents under the Christmas tree, like that was just not how we did things.
The point about the shoes, right? And that's right. I was shocked with the culture in Canada and states as well, that everyone was wearing, you know, the socks inside. I'm like, what's up with that? I've never seen people wearing socks. Like everyone is wearing it. My kids wear them right now all the time. Like, I honestly thought it was not a cultural thing. That's what they do. I thought it's a generation gap that I'm not used to it, but I guess it could be a generation gap. You know, I'm over 40 and I'm thinking my teens are wearing this. It must be new. And it looks like when I landed in States and Canada, it's been the same thing. So I guess I can get used to it. And yeah, that's shocking for me and might not be shocking for other people. Same like shoes. And I totally get it.
Football, right? Like football is such a huge American thing, and this idea of like getting together and doing football stuff, like that was so bizarre to me, how excited people would get about football and eating nachos, and that was like never anything we did in our house. I've never considered, when living in the United States, I've never considered myself an immigrant living here. I think in large part because I was here so early, and we've always been American citizens because of Puerto Rico. I have considered myself an immigrant when I moved to France, when the family moved to France, or when I lived in Japan. 100% immigrant experience, because I wasn't, you know, we were not French. I was not Japanese. And so there was definitely like that immigrant experience and feeling there. And so how that showed up at work here in the United States, I would say it's less about, I did always feel like I had to work harder, and I did always feel like I had to prove myself and explain why I was in the room. And I did feel like there were things that other people who didn't look like me could get away with that I could not. It's like an experience of, you know, being an immigrant, or I think just like plain old racism, right? Unconscious bias. And in every place I have worked, I have always been the minority. You know, even when I worked at BET, which is Black Entertainment Television. It's owned by Viacom. It's the, you know, it's the MTV for the Black community, Black Entertainment Television, right? And it was wonderful working there, but also there I'm not a Black woman. I didn't really fit in there either. And so like, no matter where I go, I just am never surrounded by either a lot of Southeast Asians or a lot of Hispanic people. It's just like life for me, right? There isn't ever a space where I go where I'm like 100% like amongst my people. Because even in Puerto Rico, where I was just there, I mean, I feel more at home in Puerto Rico than most places. But again, I don't speak the language. And yeah, and even here in the United States, I mean, I'm like around predominantly white folks all the time. And the higher I get in my career, and the more I sort of ascend the corporate ladder, the less there are of people like me. So it's always disappointing. I'm often like the only non-white person in a room, and sometimes I'm the only woman in a room, and it's just like that gets really tiring. I get that those are the little things about, you know, life where I'm just like, oh man, I'm tired of this. Like I want to be in a room where there are a ton of brown folks, you know, and they're all, and it's not because we've like intentionally done, no, just because this is the makeup of the professional sphere. And it just doesn't happen in my industry.
Yeah, I think there is definitely a gap in there from the industry you were in. And obviously, and there's obviously the gender biases kicks in as well, right? So in your industry, and particularly all around the world as well, there's a gap. And when you have that mixed heritage, and I personally think that it's a strength. Like I feel like I can fit in here, I can fit in there. And what happens is people like us, when we travel from one country to the other one, we've lived around the country, we may feel like we have a strength, and sometimes it gets to us like, I don't see myself there. I don't see myself there. And all of a sudden I'm working in silo. And that's a great point that you brought it on is, yes, I've lived here, lived there, this, you know, Puerto Rico, but I still feel that it's not enough for me, you know? So that's such a valid point. And I think this is why the podcast is all about talking about issues, how you feel. And people don't talk about it because they feel like maybe I'm the only one who's feeling it. And trust me, when I was starting this podcast, when I was reaching out to the people, they told me exactly the same thing, you know, what you're showing me right now. Sometimes it doesn't work for us because we don't belong anywhere else. Great insights on that, because you're not alone on this one. That's why it's called Diaspora's Career Challenges.
The hidden strength of people like us is that we, you know, something that like living in Japan really taught me was to be able to be in a place where you're such a foreigner. Like there is no assimilating in Japan if you're not Japanese. I just learned how to communicate with people who are very unlike me, communicate with people who don't speak my language, learn to read like body language and just sort of, I think it just made me a little bit stronger in my ability to assimilate. I almost feel weird saying fit in because you never fit in. But just to be able to be a little bit more comfortable in these situations that are awkward or where you feel kind of singled out, you just either makes you have a thicker skin or it just sort of makes you have that ability to do it a bit more seamless.
Such a great point, right? We're not trying to fit in with the mixed heritage that we have.
Yeah.
We're not trying to find that fit in barrier right there, because when you start to try to fit in, I feel like it just compromises the whole campaign about the DIV, right? Diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we're trying to stand out, but the thing is that, do you feel like sometimes you stand out because of who you are and that's what you want to do, you know, send the message, yeah, I'm here to stand out, not to fit in?
I do feel like I stand out. I don't always want to. But I think I've sort of embraced that. I'll tell you something really embarrassing.
Yeah, let's do that.
When I was little, I used to love the name, and I wanted this to be my name, Megan White. For some reason, I thought that name, it was easy to pronounce. It was easy to say. It was a name that everyone it just was like this nice, maybe I read it in a book. There was just like Megan White, right? And now, no offense to anyone named Megan White. Oh, I so much prefer Nina, you know, and like, and a name like Melendez Ibarra with a Z and double R's. It's just like, but the idea that at that time, like, I love the name Megan White. And I think that it just is so, I have learned over the years to just be really okay with, not just okay, but embrace and love the mixed heritage. It does suck at times when I'm in rooms where when I'm trying to be in a space that is predominantly Caucasian, to not be Caucasian, but also coming to grips with the fact that like that's not my problem. Also then questioning, like, do I actually want to be in the rooms where it's predominantly Caucasian? And kind of realizing little by little that like I'm not all that interested in that anymore. It's maybe a good analogy is like when you're in high school and you want to be you really want to be with the popular kids or something like that, and then you kind of realize like, oh, they all suck, or they're all bullies, or they're whatever, and it's like I actually don't want to. Why am I trying so hard to be friends with this group of people that I don't even actually really like? And it feels that way sometimes, especially in work environments. This is even a ladder I want to climb. I don't like the ladder. I don't like the way it looks. I don't like the way it talks. I don't like the way it treats people. I don't like the way it's constructed. So like, why am I trying so gosh darn hard to climb this thing? So yeah, but that's like an ongoing sort of thing that I'm dealing with, or that I'm sort of coming to terms with, as far as who I am and how I fit into the like larger, the larger scheme of things. Knowing that there's nothing I can do about the color of my skin. There's nothing I can do about the fact that like I can't sit around the water cooler talking about football.
Totally feel it. When I was working in the corporate world, it used to scare me whenever the Super Bowl came in on Sunday and Grammy came in on Sunday. Everyone would be talking about that. And hockey in Canada is great. And I don't follow any of those. I'm from the days where I used to watch World Cup, right? And the real football, as we used to say. So over here, it was a huge cultural shock for me. Next thing I know is people are talking about that, what's happening. So you know what I used to do? I used to just watch the highlights. I would make it seem like I know what I'm talking about. I'm not cool. I'm going to be part of this conversation. Damn right. Don't single me out, right? I did that. Have you ever tried that? And I was trying to fit in, to be honest. I'm going to admit to it. Have you ever done that at all in a corporate level?
Not with football, but I did get, the reason I had brought it up is because I did remember I was working at one place and someone was talking about football, and I was like, I don't know the rules. And my boss at the time was like, what? You don't know the rules of, like, you don't know football? And he said it in such a way, not in a jokey, like, but he was just, he said it so diminishingly and so condescendingly. And then this other coworker who happened to be a Black man stepped in and goes, okay, Nina, I'm going to explain to you. It's just about yards. It's just about getting it just another yard. And he was just so much cooler about it, and and treated it like it was okay. I'm going to teach you about football. It's just like those little things. It's like anything to make you feel like an outsider, like you just don't quite belong, and lo and behold, that was a place of work where I was a huge minority. There were very, very few people who looked like me. So it was no surprise that was my boss's reaction. Like that, it was a place of work where that sort of thing was tolerated, or was, it was allowed.
When the places have that thing that you're expected to know, and how come you don't know, you kind of feel like, oh, I'm an outsider here. You automatically feel it. And I felt it in the in the corporate world that I joined in, where all the boys clubs are hanging out together and they're talking about it, and I feel like I'm not a part of the group, and I try to fit in. And later on, as you said, is it even worth it to try to fit it in? Because I don't want to be there. It's nasty up there. I don't want to be surrounded by those people anymore where they don't say it, but I feel it. Moving on from that journey to coming so far in your career as a journalist, doing amazing work that you're doing right now all around. I know you've interviewed so many good people, influential people, right? Do you have some kind of example or interview that you're like, oh my gosh, that was amazing, or something that you want to share with the listener and viewer right here?
This person who, her name is Tig Notaro, and she's a comedian and actress. And there's nothing, she just made me laugh so much. And she just has this completely sort of chill, confident energy about her. And yet it can be so funny without trying. And there was something about that. We made I had a show where I made sandwiches with people while interviewing them. And I just loved that. She just made me laugh so hard. I have a deeper, life-changing thing, but she just made me laugh so hard without trying. And I always will just remember that so fondly. Yeah.
The other things that we're looking for, and if something like that, right? It just stays with you. And I think, can I tell you something that stays with me? With you, I think when you posted something on LinkedIn platform, as a user of LinkedIn, right? We both are. And you posted something about the thing that it was touching me, what's happening in Qatar. That's when I knew about your heritage. I did not know who was Nina, and you actually call it out. This is who I am, and it bothers me. It's been happening, and nobody is speaking up, because you shared the article from Guardian, I think. And it just touched me to the core. And I started to look at your bio. And that's when I knew why it bothers you when there's a labor abuse happening around the country, especially during the gaming season and stuff like that. You spoke up, and I had a high regard. And that's when I started following you. And then I invite you on. Oh, she has that South Asian background. I gotta have her on API community. And then the way you engaged and amplified that community, like API community, the speakers, and it was truly seen. And what time you even took the stage and started to moderate. And it was so fascinating that you stayed there all along, and then you just supported the speaker, you added value. And that's the day I knew that if I'm doing the podcast, she's going to be on my top list right there. So that would stay with me.
Thank you. Yeah, I remember it was there are a lot of Sri Lankan immigrants going to Qatar to help build the stadium. And they were, dying of overexhaustion and heat exhaustion and all of that stuff. And part of why I wanted to become a journalist was because there are wonderful stories, of course, which is great, but there are just things that are happening that I just people should know about it, right? And it's not that we can all go save everything or everyone, but I just feel like people should know people should know. And, it's I just have a soft spot for the underdog. And maybe I do because because of my background and because of my always feeling a little bit like an outsider looking in. I have a soft spot for people who are on the outside too. And I just, I will say, so it's hard because there's a lot out there that can just be very infuriating. And it always sort of feels like the fat cats are winning. I do appreciate, I know it's just a LinkedIn post, but I appreciate that it moved you. So yeah, thanks for saying that.
On this podcast right now, many people might not resonate, or many people might be thinking, oh my God, I'm exactly like Nina right now. I'm feeling what she's feeling right now. And that's exactly why I bring back the stories of people like you who are doing great and who is making impact into the world. And as we go and end this episode, tell me something that has worked for you to be here today as a journalist, Emmy nominated producer right now. What worked for you? One piece of advice for people who want to be journalists like you, mixed heritage or diaspora's background, or women in general, to be a journalist that they are making impact, right? Or to be a content producer, something that you feel like you've done it personally and it worked for you, and maybe you want to pass it along to the people who look up to you or who listen to you and say, I want to be Nina someday.
I was always under the impression that you had to work very hard. And I worked my butt off for the majority of my career. And I consistently saw other people advancing who did not work as hard and did not know as much and were not as qualified. And that was weird for me to come to terms with that. But I would tell certainly young folks, it's like, don't spend time working harder. Believe it or not, don't work harder, work smarter. Get to know the right people, be friends with the right people, understand how to manage up, and find ways, even if be unapologetic about finding ways to get into rooms and having folks who will bring you into those rooms, because it is not a meritocracy out here. And we want to think it is. We want to think that people get the things they have because they've worked hard and they deserve it. And I think that is true for some folks and for a few folks, but for the majority of folks, it is at the right place at the right time, having the right people lift you up. I don't work nearly as hard as some of the people in the world, as the majority of people in the world. I have no business having the things that I have or the opportunities that I've had, right? And likewise, there are people with far more than I have that have no business having what they have, because they are like dumb. They're dumb, they're idiots, and they're mean, and they're horrible, and yet they have it. So like, I would just say, it is about positioning yourself and being smart about who you know, who you align with. And that is like more important than being the hardest worker in the room. Because actually a lot of times, if you're the hardest worker in the room, people will take advantage of that. Corporate America is no joke. They're not here for the warm fuzzies, right? They will find someone who works really hard and who's super eager, and they will just, they'll just keep dumping stuff on you. And while you're sitting there with your head down, working really hard to get something done, they're out there reaching for opportunities, getting the lunches, doing all of the like networking and all of that stuff. Yeah. And the other thing too is like, do the thing that you really love. Like, find the thing you love. My mom used to say that. She's an artist. Mama, she's an artist. And she would always say, follow your heart, Nina, ma chérie. And I'd be like, and I thought that was the dumbest advice, because I'd be like, no, I have to follow I have to be pragmatic, and I have to, just like this very kind of, it sort of work hard and all this stuff and do the thing that, and I look now in my old age, in my older age, and I realized, no, Mom, I had a lot of wisdom in that, because at the end of the day, your heart, that thing in you that lights you is what is going to prevail. And the more you push that aside for these things that society says you're supposed to have, the more miserable you're going to be. And when those things don't align, you're just going to be miserable. And I just don't think it's worth living life being miserable.
Oh my gosh, that's beautiful. That ends up. And, thank you so much, Nina, for coming in and sharing this stories that I know that many people can resonate right now, and they're not coming out there and saying it, but you said it all. I feel it. You feel it. People are out there feeling it, and appreciate your time. Truly an honor to have you.
Thank you for having me.
And that's the wrap for today's episode, Diaspora's Career Challenges. We're blending in is overrated and fitting in to someone else's mold is so last season. If you love this sarcasm, don't forget to subscribe, share, and I'd really appreciate your review. I'm here to remind you that you're not here to fit in. You're here to stand out. Your accent is still a mystery to some. Who cares? So the next time someone asks, "Where's that accent from?" just smile and say, "Oh, don't worry. It's called unique. You'll get used to it." Where can you connect with me? I'm all over on social media. Connect with me on LinkedIn. And I do have a free resources for job search and career under teachingdo.com/free resources. Can't wait for you to come in and join me next week.